Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today on this very snowy and blustery day here in the Atlantic region. I'd like to welcome you as I am Cynthia Holt, the Executive Director for the Council of Atlantic Academic Libraries, who is hosting this webinar today during our Love Data Week. Just a few housekeeping things. We ask that you mute yourself during the session unless you're asking questions, and that you also turn your cameras off if possible, because we do have some people coming in on low bandwidth areas, especially those folks that are hunkering down in the snow in their homes in the snowstorm. Today, I would like to acknowledge that CAAL-CBPA members sit on unceded and traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq, Beothuk, Inuit, Wolastoqiyik, and Pescatumucudi peoples. Treaties of peace and friendship were first signed in 1725 between the British Crown and the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik peoples. Those treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between the nations. We acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the first peoples of this region, and we express our gratitude as guests on this land. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce our moderator for today, Allison Farrell, who is the acting head of the Health Sciences Library at MUN and also the Research Data Management Librarian, and also our esteemed chair of the CAAL-CBPA Research Data Management Committee. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Allison. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cynthia. Okay, so I'm really excited to see this presentation. When Elizabeth was talking about this in our committee meetings, we were all like, oh yeah, you got to do that during Love Data Week. We can't wait to hear that presentation. So we're all really excited to see this presentation because I think it's something that's on a lot of our minds. How are we going to use these AI tools for various different applications? Cynthia, did you want to pop in there? You're muted. You're still muted, Cynthia. Oh, Cynthia, you're still muted.
There we go.
Okay.
I just noticed that we actually had an AI note taker assistant join us in the session, and CAAL doesn't really allow those in the sessions because it makes people uncomfortable, but it also tends to stifle open conversations. So I just want to let folks know I will be removing that AI assistant from the session, and if you do have one, please remove it if I haven't found that one yet. But anyways, I will let you continue on.
Okay, thanks very much. So there's one way you can use AI, but not in this meeting. Anyway, so I'm very excited to see this presentation. And Elizabeth Stregger is the Data and Digital Services Librarian at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick. She supports data literacy through workshops in classes, teaching in the data science program, and working with campus partners on research data management. She used AI approaches to data organization in her fall 2024 course, Data Acquisition and Organization. And our other presenter, Sabrina Sandy, is an upper year cognitive science student at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick. She was the TA for data acquisition and organization in the fall of 2024 and currently works in the library as a data library assistant. So I'm really excited to see this presentation. So please, Elizabeth and Sandra, take it over.
Okay, thanks so much for the warm welcome. Our talk today is data cleaning in early 2025, feasibility of AI tools. We put the early in brackets there because AI is always changing, and we kind of wanted to timestamp this presentation because maybe by late 2025, our findings would be completely different. Okay. So to get started, the presenters, Allison just introduced us. My name is Elizabeth Stregger, and I'm joined by Sabrina, who worked with me on the project where we used Team GPT to create a structured prompt to convert some metadata from one format to another in a class, and the class built the structured prompt together. And now we work together in the library, which has been really wonderful for both of us. Okay, so today our plan is to talk a little bit about some of the AI promises. Like, what are we seeing online from data tools and startups? What are they telling us is going to be possible with data cleaning? And then secondly, what does data cleaning mean in libraries and in data science? Why it's important? And then I will introduce our data set for today, which is messy data from a real lab on the Mount Allison campus. And I also, in response to some questions, tossed in another data set, which has some thesis data. So that will be more library relevant, perhaps, in some cases. Then we're going to look at some of the AI tools that were available to us or that we are hearing about. One being Copilot, which is in our Microsoft 365. We didn't really even have any choice about whether or not it was going to be implemented. It's just there all of a sudden. GPT for Work, which is a plugin, and DeepSeek, which has been in the news a lot for the advances in reasoning. Then we'll talk a little bit about standard tools like Excel, OpenRefine, and R for data cleaning. And then we'll share some opinions, what we found over the past couple of weeks of doing just really practical data cleaning in both AI tools and in standard tools, what we learned and what we would recommend to faculty and students. Okay. So there are so many promises being made by different AI tools and companies right now. And I've just taken a couple of quick screenshots. The websites are almost all covered in lots of videos. They all want so much of your contact information and your time. They would like to book a demo with you. They have all kinds of promises about how you're going to automate data management, make cleaning completely effortless, automate your data prep and focus on what matters. I'm usually a little bit dubious when I see these claims, but I'm also curious and very willing to also try the tool because who knows, maybe Julius can do my data work and make my life easier. So I like to test the systems and see what is possible because maybe some things will become easier for us in the future. And then like sometimes it's also just not really clear what they mean by data cleaning or data cleansing. And most of the use cases that I see are quite business oriented. So I wanted to talk a little bit about data cleaning in the context of libraries and data science. So at this point, I think that we will have Sabrina join us for talking about data cleaning.
Hi. Yeah, I feel kind of prepared and ready to talk about data cleaning, having taken a couple of data science classes here at Mount A. So we're just going to go really quickly over some data cleaning tips and how to make sure that your data is tidy. So as you can see on this slide, the really important things or some top of mind things to think about when it comes to data cleaning are spell checks, so correcting spelling errors, duplicates, if each row is a unique observation, making sure that data does not appear more than once in the data set, whether or not it's supposed to be there. We want the supposed to be there duplicates, but not the involuntary duplicates. Letter case, you want to correct inconsistent upper and lower cases. Make sure using the same date field type, whether that's year, month, day, or whichever version that you and your team have decided on. Removing any spaces or leading or trailing spaces, and you need to split your columns to set them up for analysis. So next slide. So speaking more specifically about tidy data in R, there's kind of three main pillars of tidy data in R, being that each variable is its own column, and each column is a variable, so vice versa, and every observation is organized into a specific row. Each row is an observation, and that each value is a cell. So each cell in and of itself is a single value, and I believe these come from Tidy Data in R or R for Data Science textbook written by Wickham. Which, yeah, links are also in the chat for those specific things and resources. So they're coming through as we speak about them. So onto restructuring, which is AKA pivoting. So this is a really great example for from the textbook itself, basically kind of showing that idea of pivoting or like restructuring your data for better observation. So we can see that the first table here has observations of blood pressure for each person, and it's organized in those two columns are the first blood pressure reading and the second blood pressure reading. But to make it the data cleaner and easier for analysis and kind of easier for view, you would want to pivot it longer so that every observation for patient A is actually its own row or end, like each column holds the ID of the patient, the measurement, and the value. So that's what restructuring pivoting is doing. It we're pivoting the data to a longer format. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Sabrina. Okay, so now I'll move on to talking about the data set, which is a messy data set from a real lab on campus, actually from a Borealis deposit. So this is what that data set looked like when I received it. And this is pretty typical for data that is the underlying data for a figure in a publication. It's been organized in this way because that was convenient for gathering the data or for plotting the data, but it doesn't meet our tidy data structures. And there's some things that aren't very clear in this data set. So I thought, since we have quite a few people who are data librarians in the chat, maybe you could say, provide some of the suggestions for how we would tidy this data. Some of the things, questions that you have about the data or things that are untidy about it. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat for a couple minutes to see what people are noticing. Remove the blank rows. Absolutely. So there's a blank row in there. Be consistent with how many decimal points to use. Yes, absolutely, Allison. And actually, I didn't do that in the testing that I did, but I should have. And yeah, range checking. Absolutely. So what are the expected ranges? Any questions about like what this data set is, like what every row is? That was one of my questions for the researcher, was like, what is in every row? Oh, I see, Cynthia, you have your hand up?
Yeah, because I don't have no idea what NAG PVP means.
Yes, yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to put the, and then I'm going to put the data citation in there. And then also there's somebody saying like, what's the scale of the header row? Hours, days? Exactly, because I mean, it says time post-injection and then there's an arrow, but like, what? Definitely need some documentation. Exactly. So I'm going to put the citation for this data set in the chat, or at least a link to it. But one of the things that I talked to this researcher about was first, like, yes, like how many decimal points, like how was one of the measurements 75 and one of them really 74.4249. But my other question was yes, like what is in each row? And he confirmed that each row is one fish. So there are 12 fish in this small data set. Each one was assigned to either the control group or a group that was injected with a nanoparticle. And then they followed those fish and their heart rate in beats per minute at 0 hours, 1, 5, 10, 24. So that's interesting because I didn't know that these were fish, other than that I could kind of gather that from the title of his associated paper. But the units of the heart rates, beats per minute, that's actually like the units for the the data that's in columns like 3 and onwards. And this is just not structured in a tidy way. It totally makes sense to him and to everyone in his lab. It made sense for the plot that they were doing. But to me, as the data curator, I had a lot of questions. I didn't understand what was happening. And there's definitely some things that I would do to tidy it. Now, based on teaching in data science, one of the things that I would be likely to do would be to put this into that tidy format, which is long, the long format, and have add a column at the front for the ID. So that's like fish number 1, fish number 2, fish number 3, all the way down to number 12. And then say, was that in the control group or in the group that was injected with a nanoparticle? And then the time is in hours, and then the heart rate is in beats per minute. So ideally, this would be accompanied by a README file. But already, this would make it easier for Borealis, say, to ingest because there's no missing rows. Every row has a value. Every variable is a separate column, and each row is one observation because at time equals 0, they measured fish 1's heart rate. And I know that that was in the control group. So this is what we mean by tidying data in terms of getting things into a tidy format for R. This also works really well for data librarians. So it still needs a little bit of accompanying documentation to understand it. Okay, so I put together a bonus data set because we saw some of the questions that were coming in ahead of the session about using AI for bibliographic data. And we did do a little bit of that in our class, and we have a session that's been accepted to iAssist about that coming up in the summer. So instead of covering the data that we used in that project, I put together a quick data set, quick messy data set for some thesis data from our recent institutional repository migration to Scalaris. And what I did was I took some of the theses that had been supervised by advisors whose names I have seen represented in different ways. So for example, Josh Keurig is known as Josh Keurig on campus, but when he publishes under his full name, Joshua Keurig. Or Lisa Dawn Hamilton in psychology goes by her name is Lisa Dawn, but sometimes that can be inappropriately shortened to Lisa if people don't understand that her name is Lisa Dawn, and we see that kind of error in bibliographic records. The other thing that I did was I made the titles inconsistently and incorrectly capitalized, which is something that we do see in our thesis metadata. And then because I know that AI is actually very good at doing categorization, I thought, okay, I'm going to choose some theses that would be difficult to categorize by subject. So I chose some that are from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, where it would be difficult to say, okay, there's a lot going on here with nanotoxicology, nanoparticles. Some of these are from chemistry and some of them are from biochemistry. So I wanted to test how well AI would be able to categorize those. So those are the two data sets we'll be working with throughout this talk. Okay. So then moving on to the AI tools that we used, the first one that we started with was Microsoft Copilot, which showed up in our Microsoft 365, and I thought, okay, let's try this out. So we were able to successfully add a CSV file to Copilot. So I put the messy data file in, and I said, please tidy this data using these 3 rules. Or these rules. There are 3 interrelated rules which make a data set tidy. Each variable must have its own column, each observation must have its own row, and each value must have its own cell. And as we've talked about, there's more things that would be tidied, but I was hoping to see whether Copilot could restructure my data in the way that I wanted to look at it. And this was what I got back. And I was like, hey, that's great. The results that I want have an ID column, and that's not in this result from Copilot because that was conceptually missing from the data set. That's something that I learned by talking to the researcher. So if it just had that ID column, then that would be great. So at that point, I'm like, whoa, okay, maybe AI can actually work with structured data. That's pretty cool. And Copilot had a prompt that I could click on that said, can you explain the tidying process? And of course, I want to know how Copilot would explain this tidying process to me, where it got pretty good results. So the first thing it said was that they needed to identify variables and observations. So the variables are the group, the time post-injection in hours, and the heart rate, beats per minute, correct. But then in observations, each row represents a heart rate measurement for a specific group at a specific time point. No, each row is one fish, and I had to learn that by talking to a researcher. So that's an incorrect assumption about what's going on with the data. Then secondly, reshape the data. So this data needs to be reshaped so that each row represents a single observation. That was in the prompt that I gave it. That's a good interpretation of my prompt. Then third, melt the data. Okay, so if you're not somebody who uses Python, melt the data, it doesn't mean anything. So this doesn't help us understand what happened here with our data and what Copilot did to change the format. So that's a question mark. And then split columns. Also, why did it need to split columns? Well, that actually comes out of the melt the data part, but melting the data, splitting the columns and reordering them, I actually didn't ask for it to be reordered. And so this is very unclear in terms of an explanation of what happened. There are sometimes in Copilot, you can look at the code for what happened there and read the code in Python if you have those skills to understand what Copilot actually did in terms of interpreting this. But at that point, probably you would just use Python yourself to restructure your data instead of asking Copilot in chat to do it. Okay, so we know that there was a misunderstanding about the data here. And then as I went on and said, please add a sample ID, the results got worse and worse. So you can see here that there is an empty row with sample ID 7, and then time post-injection 0 hours and no values. Also, the heart rate, beats per minute column is back. So this is getting worse. And we did see this in class when we were using both OpenAI and what was the other one? Sonnet. That sometimes as a chat went on, if you started asking for refinements, it got worse instead of better, which is not the way that I want things to go if I was, say, talking to a research assistant, which is how we're being encouraged to think about some of these tools. So this got worse and was really frustrating. So then I thought, okay, let's see how it does with thesis metadata and titles. So I uploaded the messy thesis data and I said, correct the capitalization of these titles to sentence case. And this is the most literal interpretation possible of that prompt. If you look at the results here, the first letter of these titles is capitalized. The third row is am I normal, but it starts with a quotation mark. And because the first letter A is not in the first character location, it was not capitalized. And we also lost all of the capitalization of locations like New Brunswick, of the species names, and this made my data worse. So at this point, I was like, okay, I am done with trying to use Copilot chat to clean any data. I am rejecting this tool. Okay, so I'm like, next, moving on. Okay, so the next tool that I tried was GPT for Excel Word, which is a really strange name. The actual company that makes this has a product called GPT for Work. And this was an add-in that it was available in Microsoft 365 on our campus at least. And because this is actually in Excel, I thought maybe this would work better. And in fact, it has a lot of options that I think are pretty promising for working with bibliographic data. There's options to reformat, to categorize. All of the options are pretty good for working with textual data that's also structured in a spreadsheet. So the first thing I did was what I tried to get Copilot to do, which was to reformat the titles in the theses into sentence case, and then to put those results into a new column. So you see them side by side. And in this case, the results are perfect. The locations like Dartmouth, Nova Scotia are still capitalized. There was an error in the bottom row of this subset of the data where the species name was not capitalized, and it did capitalize them. I would be really happy if all of my thesis titles were this consistently capitalized in sentence case. So this is like a big thumbs up for AI in this case. So then I moved on to seeing if it could actually categorize these theses just based on the values for the title. And so this is a classification task, which AI is also quite good at. I asked it to, for those 18 theses that I had in that subset file, to take the text that was in column C, which is the title, and put it into the categories psychology, environmental science, chemistry, or biochemistry. And the chemistry, biochemistry, like I said, is a tricky one to take apart. Actually, on our campus, it's the same department, but students earn a degree either in chemistry or in biochemistry. And I was curious to see whether the AI tool would be able to identify what the thesis discipline was. And it did. The NA here is actually a really good sign for me, which is that when it was unclear, it didn't give it a label. So that particular thesis, nanotoxicology, the impacts of 5 nanometer silver nanoparticles on protein synthesis of rainbow trout, is one that is a biochemistry thesis, but the fact that there's nanoparticles and nanotoxicology showing up there, that's starting to look a little bit like chemistry. And in fact, that really is a faculty advisor who works at the intersection of biochemistry, chemistry, and his students. The second reader for that paper may well have been a chemist. But at this point, at the bottom of my table, you'll see a GPT error, empty balance, open add-in task pane to buy a new pack. Okay. No surprise, this is working and they want us to pay for it. So our free trial had ended. My GPT for Excel balance is empty. Please buy a new GPT for Excel pack. There's pricing. It depends on the model choice and your input and output token usage. They have a lot of frequently asked questions, and this is a good time to ask the question, where did this add-in come from anyways? And why was it called GPT for Excel Word? So when I looked into it, GPT for Work is from a company called Librarian.io. This looks very promising for bibliographic data. And there's reasonable documentation for this product to learn how to use it. You can choose between different generative AI models. You can choose between ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, or Ollama. So that's good too. You can choose which model you find is like most effective and aligns best with what you want to do. But in terms of whether I would trust this tool with my data, they say that they're compliant with all kinds of privacy things. But when I dug into it, I found that they had completed a publisher attestation, which means like a self-assessment of all of their like compliance with regulations to become a Microsoft app. And Microsoft very explicitly says that they won't be held responsible for any of like violations of that. So in terms of whether I would use this for my research, absolutely not. I don't know anything about this other than that when I tested it, it looked like it worked really well for bibliographic data, that it was both able to do some reformatting, capitalization, and also to do some like categorization that might be helpful to me. Okay, so I'm going to pass things over to Sabrina to talk about DeepSeek.
Okay, so DeepSeek has been in the news a lot recently. It has passed a lot of benchmarks. It has made other tools in comparison look not as great. So it was going to be interesting to us, and that's part of the reason why data cleaning in early is in brackets, because as we went through and kind of put this presentation together, we knew there was going to be some sort of movement in the space and something that knew that would probably change a lot of the things that we'd be talking about. So DeepSeek, in and of itself, does have a similar makeup or website like ChatGPT that one could go to online. Though since it's an open source software, like it's possible to run it on your own devices, on your own computers, at home kind of thing, rather than using a online platform and needing that connectivity. I would say though that one of the big things that when it comes to running DeepSeek locally on your own machine was that it was a little bit time consuming. Obviously, like 20 minutes here or there, like depending on your knowledge of running tools like this, might differ. And again, what kind of computer you have. I'm running a 2019 Intel MacBook, which is powerful, but not as powerful as some other machines might be. And again, speaking more to that point, like it was very system dependent. The model that I use, the open source model that I use, was about 7 gigabytes, and my laptop, I took a screenshot, it's not in this presentation, but my CPU usage was 394%, and it sounded like my laptop was about to fly away. So again, like running even a small model that was able to do some great reasoning really did take a toll on my device. So that's another thing that you have to think about. And then again, technical knowledge. I not only did I need to know like what open source was and where I could go and access these open source models, I needed to understand how to write commands in the terminal, which is very scary to a lot of people. It was scary to me when I first learned about coding and learned about my terminal. And Olama, which is like another kind of middleman software to get it running. So there's a lot of barrier to entry when it comes to DeepSeek. I would say that it gave us a really interesting output for people who want to just use these tools in terms of, I need this cleaned. Can you clean it for me? I don't think, again, only tested the smallest model that I could use on my device. I don't think it would be helpful that way because it just gave us instructions on how it thought to clean the data based off the same prompt that Elizabeth had delivered to Copilot GPT. And honestly, its instructions were pretty wonderful and kind of seemed like they would help out if you wanted to learn how to do these sort of things. But again, feasibility, if you were just looking for something quick and to do exactly what you were looking for, not entirely sure if DeepSeek would be great about that. But yeah.
You're still muted, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Thanks, Allison. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the standard tools that I use pretty frequently for data cleaning, and that includes Excel, OpenRefine, and R. We'll compare them a little bit to the output that we got for the other tools. Spoiler alert, I was able to get exactly the software that I was aiming for with all of these tools with varying amounts of pain. Okay, so I'll start with Excel. On my desktop with the fish data, I was able to clean the data in the sense of like adding new columns to add the sample ID and provide the numbers, to delete column B, which only had units, to delete row 8, which was empty, to rename columns, things like that. I could also force Excel to show me a consistent number of decimal places. So in terms of just doing that initial cleaning, it's very easy to do that in Excel. It gets a little bit more complicated when it comes to restructuring the data in Excel. I use Power Query for this, and I took notes on how I did this to share what I did. And this is also just good practice in terms of reproducibility. And in fact, with Excel, the main shortcoming is that it's not reproducible. I could get the output that I want, but to share with people how I had done this, I would need to take my own notes and then hope that my own notes are clear enough for other people to follow. And I certainly can't run these instructions without a human redoing all the work. So yeah, it definitely worked and would be a good starting place. For learning Excel, I always recommend starting with tutorials by Julie Marcoux at Dalhousie University. Her Excel material is like very kindly shared with all of us, and I have reused it in some sessions on my campus as well. It's excellent. Library Carpentry has a session on tidy data for librarians, which covers both data structures and also tidying data in Excel. Also, there's a chapter in the Research Data Management Open Educational Resource called Further Adventures in Data Cleaning, Working with Data in Excel and R. I would recommend that as well. And of course, sessions at your own university, which will also help you connect with other people who are working with data. For advanced content like Power Query, I think you're going to end up needing to go to either Microsoft documentation or YouTube videos, which can really be of varying quality, but will get you to where you need to be to accomplish something. But I would also say that at the point where you're using Power Query, you're kind of almost coding, and you might want to start consider using other tools instead, because they will be more reproducible. Which brings me to OpenRefine. And again, I got the output that I wanted, and I don't need to show you screenshots or take notes on what I did because I can actually extract the operation history in OpenRefine, which is a real benefit of using this tool. This means that if I had a lot of files that were formatted in exactly the same way, I could reuse these steps on other files to get them tidied in exactly the same way. So in terms of reproducibility and reusability, OpenRefine has tools that are really useful to us and to students and researchers. One of my favorite things with OpenRefine is that there is the possibility of clustering and editing data. So if you have different cell values that might be alternative representations of the same thing, you can try different clustering methods and change different settings to try to find different clusters and then accept them or choose not to accept them and correct them to have a new cell value. So this is really helpful for cleaning bibliographic data and anything. All of my examples of inconsistent naming conventions were found, and I would be able to fix them using OpenRefine. Okay, and now I will pass it. Oh, no, not quite yet. First, to learn OpenRefine, one of my very favorite websites for learning OpenRefine is the University of Toronto Map and Data Library, OpenRefine tutorials. Those tutorials are really extensive. There's a series of them. Often, if I am searching for how to do something specific in OpenRefine, those tutorials come up. So to work through them in sequence would be a really great way to learn OpenRefine. And library carpentry also has an OpenRefine lesson that I would highly recommend to people who want to work with bibliographic data and cleaning that data. In terms of additional documentation, OpenRefine also has a really good user manual. So this would be my top recommendation, actually, for cleaning bibliographic data. Okay, so now I'm going to turn things over to Sabrina to talk a little bit about R.
Okay, so right off the bat, this screenshot of R is like very code heavy. So for those of you who are like maybe not as well versed in coding, it might be a little bit intimidating. But the greatest part about R in terms of like the different options we've talked about in terms of feasibility and getting exactly what we want from the data cleaning is that R is very customizable, like because of its breadth. You'd be able to like do a lot of different things with it. So here we're cleaning the data and we're doing like pivoting longer. We're making sure like we're still following those really important data tidy kind of rules, making sure that there are no empty values, things along those lines. Yeah, and like mutating it so that we get another column for the hours and basically making it a lot easier for visualization if you need to do charts or graphs along the way, and basically making sure it adheres to all those cleaning rules that we've like established earlier on. So R is very helpful, a very helpful tool, though there are a lot of I wouldn't say a very big learning curve, but if you're not as familiar with coding, it's probably not going to be as easy to just jump right in as the other tools that we've mentioned, but still very usable and highly reproducible, kind of built for that reproducibility aspect. Yeah. And I think we're also sharing some great places to learn R. Yeah. So data carpentry, R for social sciences. There's also a lot of great open source textbooks. I think R for Data Science is an open source textbook that you can find online. And I believe that's what our classes were using in 2014, 2023. But yeah, further adventures in data cleaning, working with data in Excel and in R. So see, you have the possibility of using both, using a multitude of different options when it comes to cleaning your data and reproducibility. So yeah.
Okay, so now we're moving into our opinions, and then we'll move on to discussing. The main thing that we thought, like when I'm evaluating a digital tool for use on our campus or for a workshop, I mean, I'm thinking about cost. Is this something that students are going to have access to later? In terms of AI, we could also be thinking about the environmental cost. What's the documentation like? Can I confidently say to somebody, if you go away and you search for this, you're going to search for a problem, you're going to be able to fix it? Usability, what's the like learning curve like, and how frustrating is it? And then depending on the project, how reproducible is the work, especially for research? And then protections for intellectual property, like where is your data? Did it stay on your computer? Does anyone else have access to it now? So those are some of the criteria that I think about when I'm assessing a digital tool for teaching or for a workshop or for recommending to a faculty member. And so like we got to the point today where we were like, no, AI for data cleaning is not recommended yet. And you know, I'll make the exception that if for people who are like actually working in computer science and machine learning, like you know, there's a faculty member on our campus who's doing that, and students who are working on it, maybe they can use AI for this purpose and like have the model installed on their computer. But in terms of a librarian, a library technician, a student, or a researcher on campus, I would not really recommend using AI for data cleaning. Although that mysterious plugin that we found in Excel came pretty close to convincing me, but not quite yet because I don't know anything else about it yet. And then some of our advice based on working with AI in the class together was, if you're thinking about paying for an AI tool, which I did, and I had a grant so that I could do that, because I wanted students to be able to share their prompts and custom instructions and things like that. Ask for a demo, and when you have a demo, test the tool with exactly the type of data that you plan to use. I didn't do this. I let the vendor show me some very cool things. He didn't really understand what I was talking about, and I thought, well, I know what I want to do. I'm going to be able to do it, because I had confidence in my data skills using traditional tools. But it turned out that I really couldn't do exactly what I wanted it to do. And so, yeah, send the type of file that you're going to be working with to the person and see if they can really do anything with it. I, for example, couldn't upload XML files. So don't decide based on coming soon features. You have no idea what their development timeline is or whether it'll ever even happen. I recommend that you talk to a librarian, an ed tech consultant, or a colleague who's interested in AI about whether or not they have heard anything about the tool, because there are so many startups, and it can be really hard to evaluate them. And then finally, does this problem actually need an AI solution? Do we need to use AI for this? And what's important to you? What are you hoping to get out of using AI in this process? Are you focused on just getting the right output? Are you focused on learning? Because learning and solving the problem is can be very joyful, and I don't really experience that joy when I'm working with AI. Are you focused on accuracy? How much checking would you have to do? And would you need to learn programming to be able to check the accuracy of your work anyways? Or are you just curious? Do you want to play with these tools? Do you want to keep assessing things along the way? And I think that that's where I like my curiosity and my sort of practical experimental approach kind of come together. And although I wouldn't recommend using any of the tools that we've talked about for data cleaning, I think there can be value in talking about data, trying different tools and seeing what works for different people. And maybe other people have had very different experiences using the same tools or different tools. And I think we are at the point where we would like to talk about that, actually. So I will pass things over to Allison to moderate some questions for us.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. That was a fascinating presentation. And I know I have a bunch of questions, but there are some hands up already. So I will turn to our participants. Lenora, would you like to go and ask your question there?
I'm going to cover up my... Yes, hi, that was fascinating. I loved it. It's very interesting. I have too many people. By the way, I'm using Tableau and soon to be going to Power BI because Dalhousie is getting rid of their license for Tableau and blah, 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 Power BI. These are not free. You guys are talking all open source, which is amazing to me. I worked with Ocean Tracking Network for over a decade, and we did all open source there, and that's the way it should be, but especially for students and stuff. But anyway, that's not my option right now. I believe that I really believe Power BI, Power BI. I use Tableau. I'm not a fan, but that's what I've been using for the last year. I didn't know how to use any of these things a year and a half ago, because I was from Ocean Tracking Network. I really, really, really appreciate your assessment and study of trying to use AI and your wordings about Excel, because I am not an Excel fan. I used to be with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. We use Oracle, okay? Excel kills my brain. But anyway, I really, really appreciate it. So I was just curious, because I know obviously you're aiming towards open source. And you really feel that Excel, like yesterday for me, I did something Excel I've never done before because I'm trying to get through a list of faculty members, which is over 8,000, includes duplicates. Without duplicates, it's 5,500 something. And when I used their data remove duplication, they changed all the other values, even though I said I wanted to retain, you know, what department they were in and what their boo number was. And it didn't do that. And I know how to do that in Oracle. I'm pretty sure I'd be able to do it in Power BI. So it scares me using Excel because I've never had a completely successful experience with it. And I was at CS, that is my education, and I've been working in data management for over 25 years. So me and Excel are not friends, but you're comfortable, like I said,
I mean, I have to say that most people that work with Excel have kind of a love-hate relationship with it. For the kind of work that you were just describing, I might actually use OpenRefine for that, because with OpenRefine, it runs in your browser, and so you're not sharing your data with anyone. You are not actually modifying your original data file when you create your project. When you export a file, you get a new version of it.
Yeah.
So I would recommend looking at it if you have the
I
ability
never heard
to.
of it actually. So yeah, I
Yeah,
absolutely
it's
want
a
to look at
really
it.
great tool.
Okay.
It's been around for a while, and I think that could be a good solution for you.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, I think.
If you mentioned it for bibliographic data, but I also do, you know, non-bibliographic, I do both. I'm also the second expert in SciBell at Dalhousie right now. So, because, you know, I've been here a year and a half.
Yeah.
Melissa trained me and then I went past her, you know, it's like, but yeah, so you mentioned it for bibliographic data, so it would be fine as well for just normal number data.
Absolutely, for data with people, if you want to like separate email addresses out, yeah, I would recommend that.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
that's awesome, and I love this. Thank you for holding this session.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming.
I didn't even know it was I love Data Week until I went yesterday. I'm like, oh my God, I missed it.
There's lots of sessions still going on today and tomorrow. You can look at the
I know. I'm
Love
signed up
Data
for tomorrow
Week guide. Awesome. We
Thank
do have
you.
a comment in the chat by someone who used Power Query in Excel, and they found that it worked pretty well, and they provided an example there if you want to take a look.
Okay.
Or
Cool.
if you wanted to, if Mario, you wanted to join in and jump in with a comment about your example there, if you wanted.
Just about the reproducibility fact, like you can like copy and paste that mashup there or the M code file and then share it with somebody, and it, you know, as long as you have the same source file, then it should reproduce pretty cleanly.
Cool. I mean, same with Tableau. Very reproducible. I mean, that's not even the Tableau prep. It's amazing. I mean, it really is good, but it's money. And you have to have the server as well, blah, blah, blah. But it's very reproducible. It's very interesting. And it doesn't do, like I said, I just do something I've never used, which is remove data duplicates. I did it in 2 levels. One where it was including their boo number, you know, their ID and their department. So I could keep the multi-department ones. And then I did it without those instead, but keep those in mind. And it just erased information both times, actually. I found myself in a different department. It wasn't even until 2 days later, I'm like, wait a minute, what? Wait, I went back to the original file and went, oh, yeah, this is a mess. And now I'm not using any of my removed duplicate data at all.
We had another comment in the chat that they agree OpenRefine is a great tool. And Copilot and Excel, maybe not so much. They were not very good, but they're looking forward to trying other tools now. I had a quick question. I'm wondering, one of the concerns I know with AI is that your data that you're putting in might be used to then retrain the tool. So I'm wondering, did you come across that in the tools that you were using, like Copilot, this mystery one with Excel, and I forget what you call it, DeepSeek. Did you look at the terms and conditions of those? Will they now be able to use the data that you put in there for training their tools in the future?
So with Copilot, it's supposed to stay within our institution. anytime I was unhappy with a response from Copilot, there's the opportunity to give it a thumbs down. But when you give it a thumbs down, you're sending a response to Microsoft to help them train Copilot, which, like, frankly, I am not willing to put that much labor into trying to improve a system that I'm not going to use. I wouldn't put any sensitive data in there. I'd say that, like, my general approach has been based on the tri-agency approach that they're using for evaluating grants, where they have said that if somebody wants to use a grant tool in the development of their grant and they want to take the risk of putting their own information in there, then, like, that's fine. But if you're evaluating someone else's work and it's not public, then never put it into any AI tool, because you just really can't tell. And I honestly just, like, don't trust these companies.
No, yeah, fair. And I have the same feelings. And I'm wondering, do they put it out there that, hey, this is being used? Like, is that one of the flashy things that you see on the front page of their coming soon features? Do they tell you up front that they're going to use your data? Or is that something you had to dig to find out?
I've had to dig a little bit, and then also one of the things that was most irritating about working with a CSV in not in OpenRefine, in Copilot, was that it kept on renaming my file. So it was I had figure 3A, and then every time I uploaded it again, it would be like, oh, okay, now it's figure 3A underscore 1, because it's saving it in my OneDrive somewhere. And it got to the point where I actually was no longer able to open the file because it had, like, renamed itself in such a, like, extensive and terrible way that I got to a CSV that I couldn't open. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
that was not great. Sorry, I don't entirely remember what your question was. I might have just started ranting about file naming conventions.
No worries, no worries.
And then how about you, Sabrina? Like, I find, like, the student perspective on AI and, like, how you would use it for learning really interesting.
Yeah, I can totally speak to the learning application, but also along the lines of, like, privacy and using your data. I think a lot of the reason people like using DeepSeek for that example, since it's, like, open source, all the logic and stuff can be, like, running on your own device. So you're not doing as much back and forth with your data. So it feels a little bit more secure when using, like, private or sensitive information for that matter. That being said, again, I'm not sure when it's doing that reasoning, if any of that reasoning is taking your data and then sending it off to a server and doing some sort of, like, manipulation with it there. But most of the time when you're running things locally on your own device, it should be, like, staying within your computer. So, like, there's that, but, like, that's, again, a level of research that I'm not really familiar with, so I can't really speak to it. But it is, like, maybe, like, a modicum of more safe compared to, like, using, like, an online version of ChatGPT or an online version of DeepSeek. But when it comes to learning, one thing I do know, I think it really depends on the kind of person and what you want to get out of AI, and like, in that case, how you apply it. For me personally, sometimes there's a concept that I don't understand in the textbook, and maybe it's like 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, and I don't particularly feel like sending an email to my professor or whatnot. And I would find that, like, AI tools, if you ask them questions in, like, a very specific way, and, like, what I like to do is, like, let's say there's a concept, and I was like, I don't know, how are tadpoles born? Like, what is the life cycle of a tadpole? And one of the things that I like to do is, like, explain things in steps, and also if they can make any metaphors or any sort of, like, connections to other things that I might understand, and, like, have it give me that response back in that way. I find that's really good. But along the same lines where, like, it's taking your data and, like, training off of it and all those conversations that you have, I find, like, the longer a conversation gets, the more it starts to kind of hallucinate and just, like, answer your questions in a really weird way and, like, get you a little kind of off track than what you were originally starting with. But I do think that sometimes being able to have a quote unquote conversation with a tool like that, and asking questions and asking it about something that I'd said earlier and like asking it to further explain things like that can be helpful for certain things. I wouldn't like recommend it for everything, but sometimes it's a great way to get the ball rolling. And then maybe you have a way more specific question to bring to a professor or a colleague or whoever you need to ask those questions to. But yeah, that's how I typically use AI in like learning situations.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. This was an excellent, excellent presentation, Sabrina and Elizabeth. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank you.
presenting, even though you're probably itching to get on home now and get out of the storm. Thank you everyone for coming. And if I'm sure if you do have any more questions, you can probably email Sabrina or Elizabeth. I think I'm sure you can Google them. You're all data librarians. You can find their contact information. So thanks again. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming to the session. Have a great day.